Okay, in AP213, which is entitled Principles of Christian Apologetics, it's the second required course in the MDiv curriculum. I think it's important to notice that in terms of seminaries out there, there aren't very many at all that require apologetics. Most of the time it's an elective on the side. And the ones that do require apologetics certainly don't require 6 hours like we have. We have the Intro to Apologetics that Dr. Edgar teaches, and then AP213 is meant to follow up on what Dr. Edgar has introduced in the introductory course. As the title says, what I want to do initially in that course is set aside principles of Christian apologetics. That is, it's meant to be positive in the beginning. So what I do is I work through some of the theological principles that are necessary in order for us to understand how to apply defense of Christianity, defense of the Christian faith to other people, both in the church and outside the church. Apologetics is meant for both. So what I do there is begin with a kind of introductory talk on Dr. Van Til and his approach, because I want people to know that what I call the covenantal approach is going to be basic to everything that I say, and then move through, in terms of principles, the basic epistemological principium, which is God's revelation. So I talk about revelation as authoritative, necessary, sufficient, and perspicuous, but now here's the thing, both in natural and special revelation. And in doing that, then I want to try to show how there has to be an inextricable link between natural and special, that they're never meant to be separated, and the reason they are separated is because of the entrance of sin. So what I do then is work through exegetically Romans 1:18 to 32 and the prologue to the Gospel of John. Now, one of the reasons I do that is because I think it's important, necessary for people to understand that apologetics is a discipline that comes up from Scripture. It's not something that we invent, not something that we do because we like philosophy, not something that we just sort of tack on to systematic theology. Apologetics is, number one, a mandate of Scripture, so that all Christians are meant to be involved in it in some way, but that it moves up from Scripture itself. So I try to give exegetical arguments for what we mean by the sensus divinitatis, that is, the sense of deity, the knowledge of God that all people have, and how that makes a difference in terms of our thinking of unbelief. Now again, unbelief can reside in the hearts of Christians in certain ways, so it's meant for the church, but also in our communication of the Christian faith. And I make the point that what we want to do in apologetics, the goal of apologetics is the communication of the Christian faith. It's not a defense of generic theism. If you want to learn the defense of generic theism, there are other places where you can do that. And, let me just add this, if you're successful in your communication of generic theism so that you make somebody a generic theist, and on their way home in all of their excitement, being generic theists, they happen to have an automobile accident and perish, those people will go to hell. Generic theists are not Christians. And that's why I think apologetics is meant to communicate the Christian faith, to defend the Christian faith, not generic theism. And I don't think there's any easy way to move from a defense of generic theism to a defense of Christianity, because you have to change foundations in order to do that. And unless you can do that by some sleight of hand in the conversation, people are going to recognize that you're dealing with two different principia there, and that becomes a problem. So I begin then with the Prenup Iam of Revelation and attempt to show as a principle that God's own revelation in nature and in Scripture are meant to go together, and that the responsibility of the apologist is to bring natural revelation together with special revelation, so that the two are seen to go together. So that what you appeal to in apologetics, as Van Til liked to say, the Anknüpfungspunkt, the point of contact in apologetics, is that sense of deity, that sensus divinitatis, that is knowledge of God, so that people know the true God and know what He requires of them, such that they are condemned because of that knowledge, and to show how in the midst of that condemnation in comes the reality of the gospel. So you're doing both things. You're showing who the true God is, you're demonstrating the reality of this true God, and showing that this God has provided a way back to Him, a way of redemption. Then I begin to do that. I do that positively then in terms of principle. Then I begin to do that negatively in terms of a critique of the so-called 5 ways or the theistic proofs. And in doing that, I want to try to show how those proofs have been used historically and where there are some significant deficiencies. Now, Van Til said the theistic proofs are objectively valid, that there is a legitimate way to use them. So I'm not rejecting them completely, but I'm trying to show in the way that they've been used historically, there have been some significant theological blunders. And if we can shore those up and begin to see what those blunders are, then if we want to talk about causality, we can do that. If we want to talk about necessity and contingency, we can do that. But we need to do that within the context of God's truth and not within a supposed neutral context, because there's no such thing. So after we do that, then I go, that's the negative, then I go back to the positive and begin to talk about epistemology more generally in terms of evidences, how we think about evidences. Everything evidences God's existence. How we think about knowledge itself, some of the conundrums that are presented in terms of the knowledge situation, we work through that, and how we must have a revelational epistemology if we're going to know anything. That is, God is the one who gives us anything that we know. He makes the connection between subject and object. So we discuss epistemology and the principles there for a Christian, and we discuss metaphysics and the principles there for a Christian, and there I just try to articulate and work out the relationship of God to creation and how we need to think about those things in terms of who God is and how He relates Himself to us covenantally. Then if we have time in the class, I work out all of those principles more specifically in terms of the problem of evil, which I think is one of the most recalcitrant problems in apologetics, and how we might address that problem from the perspective of covenantal apologetics. So all of that is an attempt to try to build on what Dr. Edgar does in AP 101 in the intro class.